need to recognise cost of living, pressures that are faced now, the points that the public have made. I totally get them, Mr. Thraves, but equally having your duty to the well-being of future generations, because those reserves are everyone's for forever, not just for here and now. Contingency sum I draw your attention to, and that's important because there's a base contingency assumption. There's a little bit of wiggle room in there. Do you remember what I said? In the MTFP, it's minus 2 million off the £3 million base. We've got £1 million there. So 3 million plus £1 million is 4 million. If 2 million comes off in the future, you've still got 2 million. It's dropping, but it's not dropping as fast as it otherwise would be. And that is potentially some area where you've got some wiggle room to consider things today, and also provide you some wiggle room in year if you choose not to do anything today. That takes you through the rest of the table to the funding requirement, which again matches the headlines we've already referred to: £60 million in, £25 million out, £35 million net resource investment. I set out the risks in terms of inflation in the next set of the report. Won't repeat what I've already said. Schools are broadly in line with where we were in December, and you and I met with head teachers, and I met with the School Budget Forum with Councillor Robert Smith. The position is improved slightly because we do have certainty over two of the large specific grants in terms of pupil deprivation grant and post-16 grant. We've added those in, and it means the delegated budget rises higher. But again, for the avoidance of doubt, it recognises that my professional view was there needed to be £13.5 million going into schools for them to have been fully funded before the energy inflation. You are requiring schools to make a contribution to the savings that the whole council is having to do. That is well understood by head teachers and the School Budget Forum. I don't think they're ecstatic about not being fully funded for absolutely everything, but I would remind, for the avoidance of doubt, the ministerial comment about £117 million available for Wales as a whole. That would have been 9 million for Swansea. If you look at SSA, it would have been 10 million. So I don't think it unreasonable that Cabinet is recommending to Council that an increase of net over £10 million into schools plus a share of an energy fund is anything other than generous in terms of the settlement you've received. You can all aspire to do lots of things you'd like to do, but you've only got so much money. But it's an improvement on the position we've already briefed schools because of those specific grant movements that we're aware of. Capital financing charges remain an interesting one. It's the boring realm of the technical Section 151 officer, isn't it? When he gets it right, you can turn up and be told he's a clever boy because he saved you £8 million on the monitoring side. If you get it wrong, you see what happens in authorities that do get it wrong. These are very highly leveraged operations. And if you get them wrong and you end up believing you can defy gravity, you can get yourselves onto a sticky wicket. Fortunately for Welsh treasurers, that seems to be a problem particularly confined to England, because they're subject to a separate funding mechanism to Welsh local government. But it's boring, it's technical, but it does an awful lot of the heavy lifting, both in terms of budget monitoring, but also budget setting. And I've got a bit of a biased interest in it. I draw your attention next to the section 4.24, 4.25 and 4.26. You may wish to comment more once I finish my technical advice, but those fire and port health and CJC levies, I would say there is an interesting divergence of approach between the three levying bodies. It seems to me that one has levied a very large sum well in excess of inflation. I wouldn't say any more than that. One has levied an amount which seems to be to maintain its spending power, which is in line with core funding that you've got. And one seems to have done a particularly good job at keeping its levy relatively low. I will say no more than that. Section 4.27 indicates the council tax reduction scheme, because it remains the case that for whatever decision you make on council tax, between 18 and 20% of it is locally financed through a budget I hold in my finance directorate. The rest of the report, I could go on and on and on. I won't go on and on and on because you'll be bored of my dulcet tones, but I come down to the table 2 and section 5.3. I have indicated that there is a need to make some technical rollbacks on proposals set out in that table, and those are, for the avoidance of doubt, base rollback. So those come out of all years' base budgets in terms of those items, and they are indicated by italicisation in the appendix. There is no change to the schools figure. It means that in December you were just above 25 million, you're now just below 25 million. That is a very small amount of wiggle room. That's only a couple of £100,000 in the base. There is a reason for that. Nothing has changed since you had the settlement in December, other than the outlook for the UK economy and inflation and pay awards and prices hasn't got any better. So my officer advice is there is not much wiggle room in the base, but those procedural items are recommended for moving. You've got the summary of the budget consultation proposals, and as a result of further consideration, Section 6.5 pulls together a number of items that are all also base adjustments, and again referenced in the italicised appendix about things that can come out of the base. It's a slightly bigger number than the first table, but again it just shows the order of magnitude. You have not, like every authority in Wales, got that much wiggle room on the base. You've talked earlier about the staffing assumptions and the reason for why we err on the side of caution and put a big number in, but the very vast majority of them are vacancies, ERVRs, etc. I won't repeat the comments that have already been made. I am legally required to give my advice to certify whether I believe the reserves are adequate and whether the budget is sound. On the basis of the proposals as written at the moment, I am prepared to give that certification. My view is that general reserves, as I've indicated, are at the very lowest end that they can be for the size of the authority. I perfectly accept because you've got large earmarked reserves, it's reasonable to have proportionately low general reserves. If you get to a point of spending all the general reserves, I will start to exercise what I put in bold there, which is I will be advising you to increase those general reserves. But now is not the time to do that. The contingency fund I've talked about both in terms of budget monitoring and potential adds to and draws from over the medium-term financial plan. I am at this point in time satisfied that they are adequate and enable me to make my certification. In the same way applies to all of those earmarked reserves, and you will see in section 8.17 onwards, I have given my certification as worded that the position is adequate. There's no other mention other than that. It's only adequate. I don't have to grade it high, medium, or anything else. It is, are they adequate? They are adequate as worded. I will give advice if there are any matters you wish to draw to my attention in due course. As a result of that, that in section 9 sets a budget requirement and a council tax proposal. But as I've indicated, there are some matters to bear in mind. For the avoidance of doubt as written, this set of proposals is written on a council tax increase of 4.95%. That should not come as a surprise, given the medium-term financial plan says work on 5 and allow it to be flexed from 3 to 7. And you will not be surprised to see my section 151 officer revised, which is, I believe that range is still in play, but only the upper end of that range is in play. That will be a decision for you to take in due course. So I've advised it should be between the range 4.95 and 6.95. And that will drive assumptions on Band D council tax in due course. As written, section 10 pulls all together and says it is a lawfully balanced budget, and I'm prepared to certify it as such. The remaining risks are in normal fashion. I will ask whether you want to make any changes to the energy price inflation table in section E. The £15 million has been allocated provisionally across 3 areas. That figure could come down a bit. It could be reallocated differently. I will take advice from yourselves. It is in your gift. There is £15 million in the central inflation pot for that. So I'll seek your advice on that, because that could be relatively easily changed for recommendation to council, given energy prices have come down a bit. I also know that given we've bought 90% of our energy, they're not going to come down massively. We are on a different time trajectory to households that have seen their gas and electricity bills go from 1,000 to 2,500 with a price cap, and I'd like to see them go to 3,000 with a price cap in April. None of that applies to us. We've not benefited from any of the energy support schemes from UK government. We've bought all of our energy below every single strike price, so we must be doing something right. But it is still, as we've referred to previously, very painful to see £15 million of an existing reserve deployed to have to provide for this. But the device we've used means you're not being forced to make base budget decisions. And for the avoidance of doubt, this is underpinned by up to £15 million draw from reserves. I will not need to comment on the rest of the report other than to draw your attention to some technical matters, which I've said I am going to have to give you advice on, unfortunately, in terms of some technical moves. I'll reference them now. You may ask me to come back in when it comes to being absolutely clear on what you're choosing to recommend to council in due course. But the starting position is that I will need to make a £2,000 increase to the community council precepts. One community council failed to meet the 31st of January deadline. I will not mention them to avoid naming the innocents or not so innocents. I use my anticipation powers to provide for a community council precept for them. They have since now provided a precept. Yes, it's late, but you've not yet made a decision. So I'll use my substitution powers to insert that. That'll be a £2,000 uplift to community council precepts and a £2,000 neutralisation by increasing the community council element of council tax by exactly the same. I am advised, again, after the legal deadline, that the Corporate Joint Committee wishes to reduce its levy by £3,000. And I'll take £3,000 any day of the week. So I, again, because you haven't yet made the decision, would be recommending that you also allow me to make that technical amendment, which reduces the corporate joint committee levy by £3,000. The other two levying bodies have not changed their figures. That will result in consequential amendments to the budget requirement and potentially to council tax. But as I've given you advice also on considering the levels of council tax, I may need to come back in with technical advice when you come to moving that matter. I think that's all I need to give in terms of immediate technical advice. I am aware from discussions with officers and cabinet members, there may be other matters that you wish to also take a policy stance on, and I will treat them all as a whole to attempt to give a clear decision trail, both for today to recommend to council to effect your will, but not make it so complicated, because otherwise those finance staff are going to have to turn everything around again at top speed, and the danger is an error is made. Errors and omissions do happen if you do everything at 24 hours notice. So I will do my best to capture it, and I will make my notes of it, and I'm sure Mr. Evans will capture it correctly, but I'm sure he and I will confer afterwards to make sure we've got it exactly right, so there is no avoidance of doubt. So as I say, you've got a number of recommendations in front of you. There are proposals to be moved. I may come in and give technical advice again as to whether I still consider the budget to be lawfully balanced and I'm still certifying as adequate and reasonable once you've advised of any changes you wish to make. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And again, thank you for that advice. I'm sure my advice to Cabinet would be that we accept the technical amendments Mr. Smith has laid out and the rationale for doing so. I can see nods around the table there. So for Mr. Evans' purposes of recording that, we will accept those technical amendments in terms of what is already written down in the report. If I just go into my statements in order to move the report. So as Mr. Smith alluded to, in normal times, if inflation were low and if we weren't facing a cost of living crisis, this would be in of itself one of the biggest investment budgets we would ever have seen in terms of the cash going into services, as Mr. Smith said. Total 60 million, with 25 million of savings, some of which are in schools, then leaving a 35 million pound balance. But of course, Mr. Smith also referenced the fact that the proposals see us establishing a 15 million pound energy fund to help schools, care homes, leisure centres, community centres and others deal with the impacts of those exceptionally high energy bills. It is really, really important that we do not lose sight of the decision by the UK government to exclude public sector and exclude councils from the help available for energy. That means the UK government have made what Mr. Thraves referred to earlier as a political choice to leave schools, care homes and others facing the full force of the energy price increase. So, we've had to step in at a local level with a significant fund of £15 million, which we will deploy as necessary over the next few years to assist with the energy price crisis. As Mr. Smith indicated, we do expect energy prices to continue to fall. As we pre-buy energy, we will hopefully take advantage of those price reductions. But for this year, we're in a position where we have significant built-in pressures that we already know are there. But taken together, that means there's £50 million worth of additional support, help and investment available for services in this council, which is a significant uplift in cash terms. Just breaking that down, that means that education spending goes to over £214 million this year, a record amount, with £12.4 million going into education services and schools. £11.6 million going into social care, taking spending on social care to £157 million. That again is a record level, and it sees social care getting a bigger percentage rise of the budget than any other service. Within that, there is also then support specifically for children's services, which will see investment going in there, which I'm sure will be welcomed, of £1.9 million additional for children's services. We are also making investments in place, but as people will see if they look at the papers, there are significant pressures being placed on place-based services that will need further consideration. I know Cabinet have expressed views around the impacts of those very visible public services that people see in their communities each day facing some pressure. So with Cabinet support, I propose to make some further changes, Mr. Smith, in terms of the proposed rollbacks, which I believe are in section 6.5 of the report before us today. And I would draw members' attention to the following that I would move in addition to that in terms of items removed from the budget savings. So in cultural services, the implementation of the income generation agreement with the Grand Theatre Arts Wing, the review contract agreement with the Waterfront Museum, the review of the partnership with the Wales National Pool, the standardisation of charges in non-city centre car parks, decommissioning of the Nowcaster air quality monitoring system, revision of the market rents, and again, as I've indicated, Councillor Hopkins is already continuing discussions there. The removal of the 50% funding for mechanical brush resources, which helps with leaf fall and cleansing. Removal of the additional funding for litter bins replacement, and review of the breadth and scale of cleansing operations. In addition to that, having had discussions with the Leader of the Opposition and other members, happy to consider a further rollback in terms of the review of the Democratic Services and Scrutiny Support Staff and the review of Information and Governance Unit and the Welsh Translation Unit. The first one of those, as the Leader of the Opposition knows, will be subject to further review as we look at support going into both Cabinet, CMT, Governance and Audit, CDCs and Scrutiny Report. I think it's important that we get the support levels right across the whole of the operations of the Council. But for now, I do accept the request made by the Leader of the Opposition for that saving not to be made this year. As we have discussed previously, as the Chief Executive and other officers have highlighted, the concurrent number of panels running both in scrutiny, the scale of the amount of reports being taken to some committees does need to be managed and planned more effectively so that officers can support those meetings effectively. It is a constraint that officers are finding very difficult at the moment to ensure that they provide adequate levels of support to those committees in an equitable fashion. So that is something we will do. So Mr. Smith, I think those come to around 900,000 or so, I believe, if I haven't missed any. There may be others in there in terms of rollbacks, which may be within that figure, but those are the highlights of what I would request as additional rollbacks for this session. And just serve notice as well that there may be one-off further changes that we may need to decide as we get the final settlement from Welsh Government, which of course will be before Council budget. I would also then, before Mr. Smith comes back in, make some further observations. It was clear yesterday that despite an improved, significantly improved offer from Welsh Government for teachers' pay, that offer was rejected by the NEU without it even going to members for ballot. So, as Mr. Smith has indicated, the risks to the council budget in not just this year but in future years as a result of pay awards which are negotiated nationally, but if they are not funded nationally, mean that we are then left with a unfunded bill. And just to be clear on this position, we absolutely support, as I've said publicly and others have said publicly, for public sector workers to get inflation pay rises which match the pressures they are feeling in the cost of living and energy crisis. However, what cannot happen is for government in London to negotiate pay awards and not then fund those pay awards, because all that does is to say you now have to pay staff more, which we would wish to do, but we're not giving you any more money to do it, and therefore we're asking you to make people redundant or cut services in order to fund the pay awards. That is an unacceptable position and should not be something anybody supports. So I just want to make that clear. This is about preparing for the potential of not having all of the money that we would need to pay future pay awards, and recognising that if awards have already been or offers have already been rejected, that's likely to mean an upwards pressure, as Mr. Smith has outlined. In addition to that, I want to draw attention to the fire services levy. This is something I've been vocal about in many areas, including previous members of previous sessions of Cabinet. Just for those that will not be familiar with the mechanics of how that works, when the Fire Authority sets its budget and its levy, which it does independently and we have no direct control over, that is a cost that has to be borne from within the council budget. It's not like the police levy, which is levied on top of council tax. So with this in mind, given that the Fire Services Authority has decided to levy an 18% increase, which, as Mr. Smith has already drawn attention to, is very different from the other levies that have been set. And I think, in terms of that balance between placing additional costs on households versus the costs and pressures that they're already facing, is one that I could not support. But I have no powers to override, and neither does Cabinet. So therefore, we are left with a £2.2 million bill, direct as a result of decisions made in the Fire Authority. Now, if Cabinet were minded to, I just want to put that in stark terms of things, of political choices that I know Cabinet are not prepared to entertain. It could mean closure of several libraries across Swansea in order to fund the fire services levy. It could mean the closure of community centres across Swansea, which I know members would not be supportive of, in order to fund the Fire Services Authority. It could mean going to monthly black bag collections, which I know we would not wish to do. It could also mean charging for things like residence parking and passing directly charges on to households who don't have driveways. So that is what it means in terms of political choices faced by this authority. And again, those would not be palatable choices. They are not the things, when we've had conversations with residents on the doorstep, that residents would want to see this administration doing. So with that in mind, we have to bear in mind that we are now carrying not just extra pay pressures that will come forward, but also we have to pick up the costs of the decisions made in the Fire Authority in terms of the levy. So we are already, without moving on any council tax in terms of inflationary pressures, looking at a £2.2 million bill from the Fire Authority. That is equivalent in council tax terms of 2%. So that is our starting point. So without us raising any money for this authority, for the services this authority delivers, that is a £2 million cost. We've already said we do not wish to make additional people redundant and cut services, and we do not wish to make the decisions that I just outlined in terms of closing libraries and other impacts on our community. Therefore, we have to accept an additional premium for the council tax of 2% directly related to the Fire Authority. Now, in Mr. Smith's advice contained in the report, he sets a range of council tax options there of 4.9% to 6.95%. I know that, having due regard to Mr. Smith's advice, we would want to have been at the lowest end of that and potentially gone a little bit lower were we able to get some additional funding out of Welsh Government or make other choices which would have allowed us to do that. That would mean that we would potentially have been able to be around the 4.95%. But given that we have an extra 2% already built in from the decisions made elsewhere, that means we're at 6.95% in terms of council tax. However, given the balance, given the adjustments that I've suggested to Mr. Smith, and given the weight of the costs of living pressures and other pressures that families will be feeling across Wales, it is the recommendation that we should set council tax for the internal costs of council at 3.95%, with the additional 2% directly related to the Fire Authority charges that we're having to fund. So that would mean an overall council tax rate of 5.95%. So again, I have no pleasure in setting council tax at that level. It is significantly below the rate at which inflation still is, because inflation, of course, is still at 10.1%, which means that that is a direct cut to the actual real terms value of council tax that we have in this authority. It is below the decisions that I know other authorities have already made. I believe one authority has already set its council tax at 8.5% this year. And of course, in terms of direct cash, because it's all very well to talk about the level of council tax increase in a percentage terms, but you don't pay the same cash terms council tax across Wales. And for direct comparison, even with a 5.95% rise, for those living just a few miles away in Neath Talbot, they will be paying still £200 a year or more in their council tax as a result of decisions made here and made in Neath Talbot. So, we still remain middle of the table, even with this increase in terms of council tax. We still remain cheaper than our neighbours in terms of the cash that it costs residents in the city. And of course, some of the cash raised will inevitably be directed back directly to our residents in terms of the benefits that we're able to offer them through the Citizens app and through promotions like parking. So that money will be recirculated back to residents through those incentive schemes. So I haven't got a lot more to say on that, but I'll pause at that point just in case I've missed anything that Mr. Smith wishes to clarify, and obviously for Mr. Smith to give us advice in terms of any adjustments he may need to make in terms of the proposals to alter or to confirm the level of council tax within the range, and also the rollbacks that I've asked or requested be noted as part of the final budget settlement for Cabinet today. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chair. That's quite a number of amendments and adjustments for obvious reasons, as we've mentioned previously. Starting with the council tax item, if you are so minded to move to 5.95%, and I share your concerns and I share the concerns from the public, we are where we are, gives me equally no pleasure. But if you were minded to move to a 5.95% council tax increase, that would move the Band D equivalent, noting all the points you've made around not everyone pays the same and at what band it is. It would change it to £1,549.08. That would be for the minutes for Mr. Evans. That provides for an additional overall 1.342 million on council tax for the city and county of Swansea. So it would be increasing the council tax for City and County of Swansea by £1,342,000. I have already indicated I'm going to actually make a technical amendment for the community councils for a further £2,000. I will give Mr. Evans a written note of all of this afterwards because it will be complex to move. But that will mean that the financing side of the budget equation would go up by £1,344,000 because it's 1,342 and the 2K for the community council tax. If you were minded to do that, the easy one, the community council precepts would rise by £2,000, and that will need to be reflected in the minutes. My proposal would be, well, actually, now I'll come on back up to the top end of the equation. If you were to increase council tax at a rate of 5.95% and add the figure I've already referred to, there is an obligation on me to set aside 18% for a much higher council tax reduction scheme. That would be £250,000. So it is adding to the finance cash limit, not for my services, but for the locally expensed council tax reduction scheme. So again, and I'll make sure you get a full written note of amendments, Mr. Evans, to make sure we get these procedurally captured correctly. But that would soak up £250,000 of that ask. That would mean that net direct expenditure for the avoidance of doubt is being increased in cash limit terms by £250,000. I've indicated I will be moving and asking you to move that, and you've already indicated you will, that the corporate joint committee is reduced from £215,000 to £212,000. If you put all of those into my spreadsheet in front of me, that gives you headroom before we come on to the rollbacks of £1,095,000. My advice to you this late on in the budget process is that should be added to contingency for the purposes of the budget papers to avoid a major rework of every single line of the budget and to avoid a major rework of the MTFP. I remind you, I only wanted to do minor consequentials. So you would be procedurally parking that in contingency, which is a lower than expected draw from reserves because you're putting an extra amount of money into reserves. Crucially, that means contingency, which was going to go up by £1 million, goes up by about 2 million, which neutralises the 2 million you're taking off in the MTFP item. So I remain very relaxed as a treasurer over the lifetime. Money in, money out, score draw. In terms of your rowbacks, given that that gives you headroom of 1,095,000, I commend your mental arithmetic. You got to 900,000. I believe it's 901,000. And as I'm a bean counter, I am going to insist on the extra £1,000. But £901,000 it would be. £901,000 is less than the one-off money you've added to contingency at 1,095,000. So I am in a position, subject to a caveat, able to be happy that that is still safe, adequate for reserves purposes. All of the rowbacks that were set out in the report are base rowbacks. They are removals from the base for forever until you make any other decision. For the avoidance of doubt, my certification as adequate only applies if these are temporarily deferred for 1 year. I did make a note of all the items you got, and I will be able to provide you with a full written note for the minute, so there is no avoidance of doubt. To assist council and to avoid me reworking every page, we use italicized as the convention where we change anything from December to February. There will be an asterisk against all those items in that appendix indicating which ones Cabinet, if they're so minded, will be moving deferred for a year because they will be funded by that draw from contingency because you just built that headroom in. But that important point I'm emphasising around that deferral for a year is really important. If more money turns up, if the process improves, outlook improves, you may be able in due course to make those permanent. But at this stage in time, you can only make them temporary. So it doesn't mean everything's being pushed back a year. It's just temporary for 1 year. So as a hypothetical example, for the avoidance of doubt, if a saving was 50,000, 100,000, 150,000, 200,000, it becomes 0, 100,000, 150,000, 200,000. You can't push it into year 5 because you've gone beyond the end of the MTFP. It might sound really, really technical and annoying, but your 901,000 in year 1 would balloon to well over 3.5 million by year 4. And I've told you, you haven't got that amount of wiggle room in the base. You've used what wiggle room in the base. So as long as you understand that part of it, I am able to agree all of those proposals. I can give a written note to Mr. Evans, and I remain satisfied that it is as prudent as was before. If you'd not considered the council tax increase, I think you can anticipate what I might have said, which would have been you're spending money you ain't got, and I would have been less than happy that it was as prudent as before. But on the basis that you've put slightly more in than at the moment you've taken out, and you've indicated that comes to 901, you have also indicated, Leader, you may wish to move some more bits come final settlement. That is also reasonable, but at the moment my tally is you've got the difference between 1095 and 901 left, and that's all that's left in terms of final wiggle room, unless there are any other pleasant surprises come final revenue support grant. At the moment I am expecting an adjustment for fire. We may win, lose or draw on that, and we'll have to see if there are any other items, but as long as it's with that caveat, my technical advice still stands with those amendments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, and I think that's really clear, and as is the point on deferral. I think that is really clear. They're not removed forever, they're removed for now. And again, you know, the rules that we've always worked under is you can't take something out without putting something in, because the budget has to balance at the end of the day, and we understand and accept that principle. So again, if members are content, I know there's a lot of technical changes today, but that reflects the sheer scale of some of the challenges that we have at the present time with all of the various elements. It does, I think, on balance, it's absolutely the right thing to do, because I do point the fact that we do remain one council, and you know, I did listen carefully to the arguments made by the Leader of the Opposition about the need to retain staff in scrutiny. We can only do that if we set a higher council tax, and that is as a result of having those honest discussions. So absolutely, you know, everything costs, and therefore you have to raise the money if you want to do the things that you believe are right. So very happy to do that in terms of that, and as I said, we will be very clear as we come to council, and we hope that council will support the proposal when it comes, that again the real council tax being raised by this authority is 3.95%. The 2% is coming direct from the fire authority, and that people of Swansea need to understand that. I will be exercising discussions with Welsh Government in terms of how we can potentially protect local authorities from excessive rises from bodies that are not within our control, because it is something that is a bit of an oddity of the way the system works at the present time. But with that, I will move, subject to all of the amendments, subject to the advice Mr. Smith has made, which will form a technical note that can go to Mr. Evans for the minutes, the recommendations on page 64 plus the amendments. Councillor Lewis?
Happy to second, Leader.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments or questions from any Cabinet members on anything in the report? Councillor Francis Davis.
I welcome the rollbacks, and I would have liked them to be permanent, but I take on the points that Section 151 officer makes, and we got a balance, and it's just that hope that money becomes available from central government. I'm not holding my breath, but I would hope that long term we can keep giving the services that the people of Swansea expect from us. When it comes to the fire service, I think it's appalling that the decision that has been made there, 2% of our council tax, which we got no control over, and that I wish really that it is put out the same way as the police do, so that people can see, the amount that we are collecting to pass on to the Mid and West Wales Fire Authority, but people believe that local government, we collect the money, it goes out in that bill. And I think there seems to be a lack of accountability with the Mid and West Wales Fire Authority in just putting it up by that amount. It's totally unacceptable. And so good luck, and I would hope the Welsh Government could do something about it.
Thank you, Councillor Francis Davis. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. What I would like to say is put on thanks to yourself, really, for the lobbying you've done to try and get more money out to Welsh Government. It's been, it's well recognised that the efforts paid some dividends, because the initial settlement was far worse than what we really have anticipated now. And we prepared certainly for the worst. Probably been one of the worst and most difficult budget sessions I've ever had to sit on, where we have really dug deep. And I think every Cabinet member needs to be commended around the table for the deep dive into their portfolios, some of the horrible things that we've been looking at trying to do. But I think chief officers have worked, and the Cabinet members have worked really, really hard to get where we are today, to make these decisions not easy, but they are obviously necessary for where we are. So, and I also like to really put my record onto the trade unions, the way they've engaged throughout this process, to ensure that they got the representation made by them. We've listened to them right the way through. So I got nothing else to say, but it's not easy, but I think it is the best we could possibly do at this particular time. And I would like to thank all them individuals I mentioned.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Fully agree with that. It is a difficult process. I don't think you realise how difficult it is until you're actually in the process, and how challenging it is. As Councillor Francis Davis said earlier, respects are due to Mr. Smith, Sarah, and the rest of the team there, who've worked tirelessly in finance to do it. The heads of service, I know this has been incredibly difficult, and there have been lots of difficult discussions with staff around the proposals in the budget. Nobody wants to be in that position, and that's why a change of government and a change of approach is needed, because otherwise you're inevitably going to end up year on year in difficult discussions, because there simply isn't, to coin Mr. Smith's phrase, enough batter in the system, enough money to go around to do the things that need doing, and that's a horrible position for us all to be in. I do want to place my personal thanks on record for all those that have contributed: Cabinet, senior officers, finance teams, trade unions, and others for the work that's being done. It's incredibly difficult to manage in these circumstances, and unprecedented pressures that we haven't seen for 40 years or more. So thank you all for that. We have the recommendations moved and seconded. Was there any? Sorry, did I miss anybody else want to come in? No, if there's not, okay. We have the recommendations moved and seconded as amended with all of the changes. And Mr. Evans, if we can launch the vote, please.
Thank you, Leader. The vote has been launched. Give everybody a moment. Anybody need to vote verbally? Councillor Francis Davis.
For.
Anyone else?
Say so.
Councillor Stewart. for. And that is unanimous for, Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. Thank you, colleagues. We'll move now to item 11, which is the capital budget and programme for 2022 to 2028. Mr. Smith again.
I'll be pretty quick on this one, Chair. This is a capital programme proposing a number of rollovers into future years and sets out how financed. It is the thick end of £400 million over the life cycle of the capital programme as set out. I draw your attention very briefly to appendix, I believe it's A as I scroll down, it might be appendix B, I will find out. Yep, appendix A setting out the £398.349 million proposed. The eagle-eyed will spot that the very vast majority of that is in current year or next year, and then it materially tapers off, and that is why in all of the papers I have referenced between the MTFP, the revenue and capital, that I have no doubt there will be a need to be additional capital spend and additional capital borrowing. I have made an explicit planning assumption of £50 million, which is set out in the papers, and I'm making an explicit assumption that that can be financed at 3.5% or lower from the PWLB and a 2.5% MRP, 6% of £50 million being £3 million, and that is why in the MTFP papers you see it is not base funded, it is being financed from reserves in the short run. Another unusual procedural device, but done for precisely the reason I've already advised and will continue to advise Council when it comes to the Treasury strategy. It would be absurd for me to go and borrow at 5%. I'm not going to get 1 point something, but I would like to borrow at 3.5 or lower if at all possible. So it is a sound, rational strategy, but for the avoidance of doubt, you're not voting on the new stuff yet, but there is an inevitability of new stuff coming. Appendix B sets out how it is financed, and all of the advice I've given to date is on the basis that it is adequate, reasonable, affordable, but there are those decisions still to be made. At some point, those MTFP assumptions will need to be baselined and revenue headroom created to pay for it. That could be further savings, it could be efficiencies, it could be a switch between revenue and capital, it could be an increase in council tax, it could be loads more revenue support grant coming. We simply don't know. But on that basis, as long as you understand it on that basis, the capital programme in front of you, I have nothing further to technically add. You've only got the one recommendation to move. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, for that. Just some brief comments from me. Obviously, we have had relatively the biggest capital programme in Wales, subject relative to our population. We continue to have one of the largest capital programmes anywhere in Wales. But of course, as Mr. Smith has indicated, the buying power of our capital programme is somewhat impacted by inflation, as it would be anywhere else. So I know those who are helping to deliver and overseeing the delivery of major schemes across the city are doing what they can to ensure that we continue to stay within budget, that we value engineer, and that we try and offset any of those pressures. But having said that, there's lots of good in this budget, in this capital report. £156 million going in for capital schemes this year. That will include things that we've already discussed at Cabinet, including, £7 million, the continuation of £7 million into play areas across the city, including £2 million for play areas to have better access and equipment that is suitable for children with mobility issues. There's also nearly £8 million worth of repairs and improvements to school buildings, community buildings. We're taking on some work around the war memorials. We made a decision quite rightly a few years ago to ensure that war memorials didn't fall into disrepair. And we're honouring that commitment in here. But of course, we're also delivering a lot of the big projects, the repurposing of the British Home Stores building in the city centre, the creation of Castle Gardens. We also have the ongoing regeneration of the Palace Theatre and others. So it's a hugely ambitious programme. There is obviously more coming in terms of future reports, which we'll talk about in terms of HRA, which I'm sure Councillor Lewis will say about. But again, investment in schools. We have a £150 million programme for school upgrades, and we are intent on delivering that best possible site for and facilities for those children with additional needs in terms of our school estate, and of course our continued investment in better school buildings across the authority. Likewise, in terms of housing, You know, we've returned to council house building. We're building a whole raft of new council homes, which are, you know, up there with the best possible homes that people could acquire privately. And of course, we'll continue to invest in better bathrooms, kitchens and other infrastructure, which I'm sure we'll say more about in future reports. Overall, though, a very significant programme and continues the ambition that we set out at the election for improving the fabric of the city and county of Swansea. So with that, I will move the recommendation on page 133. Look for a seconder.
Yeah, happy to second, Leader.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions from members? If not, Mr. Evans, if we could launch the vote on item 11, please.
Thank you, Leader. The vote has been launched. Okay, does anyone need to vote verbally?
Yes, please.
Councillor Rob Stewart,
4.
and that's unanimous 4. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Excellent. We'll move then to agenda item 12, which is the HRA revenue account. I'll go to Mr. Smith first for his technical advice.
So again, I'll be brief. You have one recommendation in front of you. I think the paper is very, very clear, but I draw your attention in terms of my one bit of technical advice, which is section 4.1.5. I'm sure Councillor Lewis will follow up. This is a ring-fenced revenue account, predominantly driven by the increases already proposed in terms of rents already considered at council. And that is that final item in that table around rent increases and increases in other charges. You see a range of spend pressures set out, but the eagle-eyed will note that the spend pressures and additional spend on capital, which we'll come on to in due course, amounts to approximately 8.5 million. And if Mr. Thraves were still here, he would see that there is a proposed draw, as you alluded to in your written response to Mr. Thraves, a £3.6 million draw from reserve. So this is yet another report where your Section 151 officer has given you technical advice that he is satisfied that it is reasonable and prudent and proportionate, but you are again drawing significantly from reserves to get, in my humble opinion, the balance right at a technical level. It is, of course, a policy matter for yourself, but I think the numbers there are very, very clear. So I will pause there, and I suspect you will be handing over to Councillor Lewis. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Smith. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Leader. I appreciate that the Cabinet have had the report in advance and have no doubt gone through it, but I would like to highlight some of the areas in the report. Firstly, we continue to closely monitor our rent arrears, which are hovering around £3 million. You will see in the report that we're confident we've got significant bad debt provision to be able to address any increase in those arrears, but just to give assurance to Cabinet that we continue to work through our rents team to work closely with tenants to prevent them falling into significant arrears in the first place. And that includes working across services and departments within the council and other third sector partners, signposting people to help wherever they need it. 2.2, the revenue repairs spend has been monitored. You will note that there's an overspend in the day-to-day repairs. This is partly due to the fact that there was a backlog of repairs during COVID. Clearly, we weren't able to get into people's properties because of safety reasons. But also, I would like to, advise Cabinet that following the tragic death of Awab Ishaq on the 15th of November 2022, which was closely linked, clearly directly linked actually to damp, mould and mildew, that this local authority have decided as a result of that to invest in a dedicated team in building services who are completely dedicated to dealing with our mould and mildew repair issues. Understandably, in December, we saw more than a doubling of the reporting of those repairs. But in addition to that, I'm pleased to say that we've successfully launched our housing portal, which makes it much easier now for residents to record and report any repairs that are needed. In addition to that, we continue and have slightly overspent £0.3 million to address our voids. And we will continue to invest heavily in trying to reduce those number of voids, obviously mindful of the significant need for move-on accommodation and to move people out of temporary and emergency housing and into that. So we will continue to focus on that. And I'm pleased to say that we've got a new contractor dealing and focusing directly on that now to try and bring those numbers down. In addition, there's a further 1.15 million increase in the electrical testing. This is as a direct result of the changes from the Rent in Homes Act. We were doing cyclical testing every 10 years. That has reduced to 5 years, which is clearly needs additional investment to address that. Employee budgets forecast to be overspent by 0.34 million. That is directly linked to the flat rate pay award, which has been implemented. But I'm pleased to say that all of the anticipated overspends will be offset by the reduction in the revenue contribution to the capital transfer of £7.6 million as a result of slippage in the capital programme this year. You will see at point 4 the revenue budget proposals that Mr Smith referred to regarding the table at 4.15. And members will note the significant amount of investment in the changes is largely linked to revenue repairs. So that reflects this authority's ambition to continue to address those repairs for the benefit of tenants. And 4.1.6, just to refer that income is expected to exceed expenditure next year by £25.5 million. And this will go directly to contribute to the capital programme of £50.85 million in 23-24, which I'll come to in more detail in the next report. Reserves are detailed in Table B at Appendix 1, and the summarised HRA is detailed again at Appendix 1. So happy to move the report, Leader, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Anybody else got any comments or questions? If not, you've moved the report. I'm happy to second the report. Mr Evans, if you can launch the vote.
The vote has been launched. Thank you very much. Anybody needing to vote electronic, verbally even? Apologies. Councillor Rob Stewart?
Yep, 4.
4. Any others? Councillor Anderson? 4. And that's unanimous 4. Thank you, Leader.
Okay, thank you. We'll go then, colleagues, to item 13, which is the Housing Revenue Capital Budget and Monitoring. Capital Budget and Programme 23 to 27. Mr Smith again.
Thank you, Chair. Again, technical advice can be relatively short because the report is self-explanatory, and then I'll hand over to Councillor Lewis. You have a capital programme which is the thick end of £270 million over the lifetime set out in the report, and equally importantly showing in the Appendix A how that £270 million is financed, including major contributions from that revenue surplus, which is being self-invested back into the housing stock. You will see that there are borrowing requirements for the HRA, and the borrowing requirements for the HRA are themselves ring-fenced, albeit both general fund and HRA both access the loans pool, but elements of it are combined and elements of it are separate for the subsidy transfer, which you will see in the Treasury Management Strategy, which comes direct to Council. But again, you can see how the £270 million is financed. Councillor has already referred to one of the figures for the investment in the coming year. I remain satisfied that it is a lawfully balanced HRA capital programme amounting to over £270 million and sets out how it is financed. I have nothing further to add. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Smith. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, again, just to highlight some of the points in the report. So just to refer to the fact that there is a revised programme for the current year, which is 37 million, or just above, from an original budget of 58.2 million. The reasons for that, which I think, Leader, you referred to in terms of the Council's wider capital programme, largely due to post-pandemic buoyancy within the construction market, but also further compounded by demand for core building materials and difficulties with supply chains and specialist skills. So we will continue to look to address those as we move forward and try and factor those into future planning for our future capital programme over the next 4 years in this report. So you will see the revised More Homes programme, which includes an increased budget for the acquisition programme, I'm pleased to say. So as a local authority, we are focused on buying back ex-council right to buy properties and bringing those back into our stock to try and address the significant demand for council properties. We remain around 7,000 people on our waiting list at the moment. So there's clearly a definite demand for our council homes, naturally, because we are the cheapest provider in terms of rents across the authority. I'm also pleased to say that we have 2 schemes converting the former district housing offices back into accommodation using the Transitional Accommodation Capital Programme funding. And this will also help to address and alleviate pressures on the homelessness sector. Welsh Housing Quality Standard, this council has now reached 70% compliance with 30% acceptable fails. But of course, we will continue wherever possible when those properties become empty. We will continue to try and bring those up to the standard and improve kitchens, bathrooms, enveloping, windows, roofs, and front doors, etc., to bring up the energy efficiency of those properties. So we'll continue to do that when they become vacant. At 4.3 and 4.4, really pleased to say that we've got significant investment, 8.75 million each year across the 4 years, investing in solar panels and battery storage for the benefit of our tenants. And we will connect that to the wind and weatherproofing programme schemes. So when we go out to a property, we do it all at once rather than duplicating and going back to a property twice. So that will clearly have an impact on helping those tenants to address fuel poverty, which is significant regarding the energy bill increases that we've seen. The 4.5, I think it's really important that we note that the investment required across our stock to reach full decarbonisation is estimated to be around £750 million. Clearly, we haven't got this kind of funding within our budgets, and we will continue to lobby Welsh Government to help us address this agenda and continue to apply for grants and any funding available to be able to do that. And the More Homes scheme, there's an indicative expenditure of £55 million over the next 4 years, which will help us reach our ambition internally to have 1,000 extra homes within the council authority ownership. But also, in addition to that, we will be looking at joint ventures across the general fund and HRA land to try and bring those numbers significantly higher than that. And we continue to work with hopefully local partners and local developers to help address that. So you will see at Appendix A, there is significant investment from this Labour administration in our council homes of £270 million over the next 4 years. And I'm certainly very proud to see that as an authority, we continue to invest in homes for the benefit of our council tenants. And I won't refer to the detail in Appendix B, but as members will note, you could see there's a significant programme of delivery over the next 4 years, something that we should all, I think, be extremely proud of. So with that, Leader, I'm happy to move the report and take any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Yes, a significant programme of investment continues in our homes. And as you say, the risks identified by that tragic incident in terms of mould in properties, that is something that we are very focused on. And, I'm pleased to see the creation of the team so that we can swiftly respond where any issues are identified. Okay, with that, are there any questions or comments on the report? If not, I'll ask Mr. Evans to launch the vote again, please.
Apologies for that, a technical issue on my side. Yeah, the vote has now been launched. Anybody needing to vote verbally? Councillor Anderson?
For.
And Councillor Stewart?
For.
That's unanimous for. Thank you.
Thank you again, colleagues. Okay, we'll go to agenda item 14, which is the report to CAR Member for Care Services. Annual review of charges 22-23. Councillor Gibbard.
Thank you, Leader. I think, you know, in the context of what a lot of the things we've discussed today is with some reluctance that I'm bringing forward this report today, as it's been a very difficult decision to make to increase our charges in social services. But, you know, this is an annual report, an annual review, but clearly this year is a particularly challenging one, notwithstanding the uplift, which we're very grateful for in the Directorate. Extensive work on this has been done, and we've carried out a full integrated impact assessment on this. Public consultation as part of the budget process, which has responded positively in terms of people, the majority of people wanting to willing to pay that little bit more in order not to lose services. We've also done targeted consultation by writing out to everyone as far as possible that currently pays for care, to give everyone the opportunity to ask questions and to find out if they're affected. By way of reassurance, we will continue to carry out the fair financial assessments to determine people's ability to pay, and everybody who pays is subject to the cap set by Welsh Government. It is very difficult to determine how many people are going to be affected by this, as obviously people's needs change, the demands changes over time. But in the snapshot that has been outlined in the report, only 25% of clients will have to pay more, and for some people this might be as little as 60p once they go up to that cap. And hopefully the uplift in benefits should cover some of this. But of course we will continue to monitor the impact of this on individuals and groups, and endeavour to put in the support which exists for anyone who is struggling to pay. So I'll move the 4 recommendations, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gibbard. And as you say, we've given due consideration to the fact that of the balance of pressures here. But as you say, over 70% of people will be protected from the rise, and those that are affected may be impacted in a negligible way, hopefully. So it is difficult always in this area, but again, it's important that our social services continue to be resourced and supported in a way that allows us to deliver quality services. Thank you for that. So thank you for moving the recommendations on page 195. I'm happy to second the report. Are there any comments or questions from Cabinet members on this one? If not, Mr. Evans, again, if we could launch the vote, please.
Thank you, Leader. The vote has been launched. And again, if I can take any verbal votes. Councillor Stewart.
For.
And that's unanimous for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move now to agenda item 15, which is local authority governor appointments. Go to Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Leader. Formally move the report. There are 4 individuals nominated at governing bodies in 3 schools. So I would formally move.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I'm very happy to second the recommendations. Are there any comments or questions? If not, we'll move to the vote again, please, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Leader. The vote has been launched. Sorry. And again, if I can take any verbal votes.
Yes, please. For.
Rob Stewart. For. Any others? I'm 1 person missing on this one. And I know, I appreciate that. I'm still 1 person missing. Otherwise, it's all in. That's unanimous for. Thank you, Leader.
Okay, many thanks. Many thanks, colleagues. We'll move now to item 16, which is the cost of living support scheme, additional discretional scheme categories. Very pleased to bring this report. I don't know whether Mr. Smith wishes to say anything on this item before I introduce it. Mr. Smith?
Yes, please, Chair. A
Okay.
couple of bits. Yeah, it's been a long meeting, but it's also important I do give you some technical advice on this item. You've got a raft of recommendations in front of you. The first 3 are noting the existing scheme, which has already been done. This is a report that I've been able to bring forward for you to consider, where I'm not the nasty tax collector. I'm not the nasty Section 151 officer making you do things to balance to the law. we have some spare money here, and I'm not in the business of trying to give it back if I don't have to. I'd rather give it to people who are eligible for it. But as you'll be aware, with a number of schemes that when you have to apply for it, you'll be horrified how many people who are eligible for schemes don't apply for them. So under the mandatory scheme, anyone we identified, we did it the Swansea way, which was to auto pay it to anyone we could find. Recommendation 4 is for those, we couldn't do that earlier on with the discretionary scheme. So the discretionary scheme, we're proposing to do exactly the same. There is a danger, I could offend someone. Someone may have taken a moral stance and doesn't think they need the money and hasn't applied. But I think the balances and risks are such that it is worth doing recommendation 4. And then the big recommendation is recommendation 5, because I still have money available in that discretionary scheme and a raft of eligible categories, which I think from a technical officer point of view are the logical ones to recommend to you. They're all set out in those very long recommendations. Mr. Evans is going to be not happy with me in terms of the number of reports I'm bringing with long-winded recommendations today, challenging only the statutory resolution on council tax. There are risks. There are some risks with any scheme that's designed. The biggest mitigation is section 3.3, which was when the discretionary and mandatory scheme were made available. Welsh Government gave each individual section 151 officer in each authority unfettered discretion to apply it to anyone he or she felt was deserving. I believe these people on the list remain deserving, but it is a policy decision as much as an officer decision. So I wanted you to have visibility today. I could have just done it, but I think it's more appropriate to take a policy lead from yourselves. That's what section 3.3 is doing. And reiterated in section 4.4, which is, as well as my unfettered discretion, it is the balance of risks around doing something that is for the greater good. No one loses out who's already had money. That there is, as set out in section 4.5, as of today, at the time of writing the report, £717,000 available. I do not want to write a cheque to the Welsh Government and give it back. I don't think they want it back. I'm sure HM Treasury don't want it back. So on that basis, the summation of all of those eligible categories is summarised in section 4.9. But because I am a prudent treasurer, I haven't spent the whole 717. It's a proposal that recognises £669,000 be allocated for all of those eligible that we can auto-identify. And that still leaves a little bit back if anyone else who appears to be deserving present themselves to me. The intention is still to have spent every penny by year end, because this is meant to give some assistance to very, very hard-pressed households. You will see some of them are very, very straightforward in terms of the category exemptions. I would ordinarily, as section 151, just do them. They are obviously deserving cases. The hardest part of the design is where do you draw the cliff edge effect? The national mandatory scheme was you got something if you were A to D. Do you go into E? Do you go into F? The more bands you put it in, the less it can be spread around that little bit of jam. Some other authorities have already put something into band D, and it is a very artificial cliff edge. It's a fundamental problem with council tax, isn't it? I think I needn't labour any more points. I'm satisfied that from a technical point of view, this is the best thing to do with those risks that I've highlighted, but I would like a policy steer from yourselves as to whether you think these are the best things to do, and then my officers will intend to get the money out ASAP before we have to otherwise give any of it back. So those are the recommendations in front of you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And again, thank you for providing the options on this one. You and I have discussed previously on this, and I think just reminding people that we were during the pandemic the fastest paying authority, making sure the grant got out, grants or additional pots of help that were flowing through the council out to residents or businesses were getting there. And again, that was a tribute to the work that, again, Mr. Smith and his teams did to do that. As Mr. Smith has said, we have a residual 717,000. I think the choices are right. We did get a lot of concern back from those households that had just gone into Band E, which were households that were struggling but were facing no help from the original scheme. So I think it is right to extend it to that small number of households who are in the Band E category, rather than provide a very, very small amount to those that have already received help. And that, as Mr. Smith said, that is where some of the nuancing around that exists. We do have a lot of housing in bands A, B, and C. That accounts for nearly, I think, 90% of our housing is in those bands. So we do have a lot of housing at that area which have already received help. But I don't think there's any of the recommendations there that we would disagree with. And I do take Mr. Smith's point about having the technical power to just do this. But of course, in a good member-led authority, officers don't do that. They have conversations and they take steers from their political administrations. So thank you very much. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Leader. Very happy to second the proposals and, of course, warmly welcome the support outlined within this report, but particularly recommendation, I believe it's 5C, which is the council tenants that were eligible for support, but unfortunately didn't meet the deadline September last year. So I really welcome the support for council tenants, those who are in arrears and in most need. So very happy to second the report, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lewis. Councillor Francis Davis.
Yeah, I'm glad that you, Leader, and the Section 15 officer, one officer, had that conversation. Nobody wants to send that money back. There are a lot of people out there who are struggling and need this money. And it just goes to show that the right-wing press of this country, how they sort of get it wrong so many times about the, they're quick to say, oh, people who are claiming a benefit in Britain. There's more tax evaded in Britain than benefit take up. Those people who are entitled to benefit who don't know about it. And this is money here that we want people to be able to claim and get it and take it. So congratulations both on getting this out there.
Thank you. Councillor Pugh.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I would like to pay tribute to all the officers here, to Julian and his team. They've worked above and beyond to get these benefits out as fast as possible to as many people as possible. And I have heard off people out there because it's very emotional. It's very hard for people out there how well our officers have worked with the public, how supportive they've been. And, we know from a benefit point of view that even in general benefits, people underclaim. People don't know what's available. We think that we've put out as much information as possible on things, and we still get a large percentage of people underclaiming. So, for me, from a poverty angle, I think this is excellent. I certainly wouldn't want to give the money back, and absolutely agree to pick up our vulnerable people. And there's a lot of people, like, particularly like somebody who was caring for someone in the house. They often get missed in things, and I can't thank you all enough, Ben and everybody, for doing this. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Councillor Pugh. Is there anybody else who wishes to comment? If not, Mr. Evans, if you can launch the vote again. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. The vote has been launched. And if I could take the verbal votes, Councillor Stewart.
Yes, 4, please.
And that is now unanimous 4. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Cabinet, we come to our final report today after the mammoth session, and this is again a positive report. It comes in the joint names of myself and Councillor Francis Davis, but it covers portfolios of many members of Cabinet, and there will be impacts across the council from this report. You'll know that we were successful in achieving £39.8 million as part of the Shared Prosperity Fund. That is a fund that obviously replaces some of the EU funding. It's not a like-for-like replacement, and the amount in that fund is significantly reduced over what we used to get as an amount from the previous EU funds, but acknowledging they are not direct like-for-like replacements. As you'll see within the report, the overall regional total is £131.9 million, and as I said, 39.8 of that comes to Swansea. The recommendations that you have on the page 297 will see that what we propose to do is to set up a mechanism within Swansea for the allocation of those funds. And following discussions with officers, I was very keen to ensure that there were Cabinet member involvement at the appropriate level in terms of awards of funding, so there's both visibility and control from the administration in terms of supporting the work that officers will do to get the money out the door. So what that means is in item 4, where we've got awards above 25,000, it'll be myself, the relevant Cabinet member, head of service, and Director of Place and Director of Finance to allocate those. Where it's below 125,000, it'll be the relevant cabinet member, Economic Development and External Funding Manager, Head of Service for Planning, Head of Director of Place, who will make the decisions. And I think that's important because we're talking significant sums of money here, and it's important the cabinet members and officers are at one on that. I just want to draw your attention then to paragraph 4.6 in the table 1 there, which shows the allocational budgets for those areas, and you'll see supporting communities around 3 million, transforming county place 3.5 million, culture and tourism 3.5 million, rural 800,000, business supporting activities 5 million, and employability pathways to work 6.4 million, and then a general open call remaining of 8 million, skills 3 million, and the multiply option, which of course we're still working through with the UK government in terms of how that will operate. I think very much welcome the money. Wish it had been at that higher level. Wish that the formula hadn't been changed so that need was reduced in there, because that has seen money drift from the southwest of Wales to the southeast of Wales. As a result, we have higher need, and always under the EU rules was that money would follow the need. So it is a difficult settlement, but still welcome significant amounts of money being provided. And then finally, what I would say is we're continuing to lobby, and I'm lobbying directly through the WLGA, written to Michael Gove recently, because we had both the money and the outlined terms of the agreement late in the day, which has meant that the timescale left for delivery of these schemes is condensed. Now, what we want to make sure is that, given that the UK government caused the delay, nobody else, that we are not then caught up by having money clawed back because there's insufficient time to deliver. So we're very clear in terms of that, and we hope that UK government will accede to those requirements to ensure that we don't lose the money that's been allocated to our region. So with that, happy to move the report. Members may want to talk about items in their areas. I'll go to Councillor Francis Davis first to second, please.
This report, is the amount of work put into this by people like Paul Ralph and his team has been astronomical. Every time I look at Paul Ralph, he looks worn out, and I'm sure he is, by the amount of work that they put into it. These are a large sum of money, but it has been late coming to us as well. So we got to make sure, as on the previous agenda item, nobody wants to send money back. We want to make sure every penny is spent. It looks a lot of money, but it is not a lot of money, that the amount of applications that will come in for this. But we got to make sure that it's money that will be well spent, and not just spent for the sake that money's there. What we need is good quality applications, and to ensure that we get good quality outcomes from it. But happy to to second this.
Thank you, Councillor Francis Davis. I do fully agree. Paul Ralph and the team there have done an exceptional job in a limited amount of time. And of course, they're not just doing it for Swansea. They've had to manage that whole, as you say, for the entirety of the region. So really pleased again with the work that they've done. They're exceptional team. Any other cabinet members wish to make a comment? Councillor Pugh.
Yes, thanks. I won't repeat all that's been said. I would like you both to thank the officers, because those deadlines have been really tight. They were late coming in, and Paul, Ralph, Elliot, all of them have really worked flat out to achieve this. Obviously, we welcome the money. As you said, it's not as much as from the EU, but it does have more scope. And there, as you can see in the report, there's 4 modes of delivery. Therefore, we're trying to sort of cover the community locally and everything. We've got the anchor projects, the grant scheme, the standalone projects, and the procured projects, and between it all, I think it shows our decisions, our determination to work best for the community. And I believe it has shown that in the report, and that local partnership will be a core component to how the fund is administered locally. There'll be a range of procedures and processes to allow for fairness and due diligence. And I'm just really pleased that this is here now and we get a rapid start on it and start getting the money out through the door. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pugh. Fully agree. Okay, if there aren't any further comments from colleagues, then Mr. Evans, if we could launch the vote, please.
Thank you, Leader. The vote has been launched. And if anybody needs to vote verbally, I shall take your votes now. Councillor Rob Stewart.
For.
Councillor Rob Francis Davis. And that's unanimous for, Leader.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. I know it's been a very long session, but lots of good announcements in terms of investment in services and other support. So thank you all very much for your attendance. I declare the meeting closed.